To start off with, I'm going to give a little story here. And this story is about Farmer Johnson. Farmer Johnson has a big ranch in the western U.S., and on his big ranch, he has multiple vehicles, bulls. He needs to buy a new truck, a new bull. And he likes the social aspect of going to auctions, so he's going to drive 600 miles from his western ranch location over to a auction that has a very broad-based selection of trucks, bulls. And this particular opportunity presents itself to where he has the ability to buy this truck, bull, and he goes to pay for this truck. And so, of course, they take his money and they thank him for that, but they also get to tell him, you don't get to take your bull home with you. Because, Farmer Johnson, you see, there is a diagnostic test that we have to do on your truck, bull. And this test doesn't allow us to do it ahead of time because there are some states, and in particular the state that you're from, that does not let us pool samples beforehand. So therefore we wait to see where the trucks are actually going, bulls, and we do the testing after the fact. So I understand you brought your gooseneck trailer and you drove over last night and you stayed in the hotel, but you're going to have to go home. And it's going to take us a while to test all these trucks, bulls, and you can come back, or we've got some people that will actually haul your truck, bull, for $300 to $500 extra for you back to your place once we get done testing. So I do want to kind of describe, briefly for you what we have to do is we have to turn the truck on and make sure nobody's around the front end of the truck so it's not moving around when we're trying to take this sample from the muffler prepuce. And we use this little device. We call it a collection device, Trich, and we insert that up in that muffler and we scrape out some actual material, schmegma, and we basically get that sample and we utilize that to be able to do our diagnostic test. And so we submit that to the lab and they run the analysis, and then we'll be able to give you a call and let you know when that test is done and how your bull did in our truck, and you can come get it. So what's interesting about this, I hate to tell you as well, is the seller of the truck, bull, that you bought is not happy that you bought that truck / bull, because we're going to have to actually charge him for yardage for leaving that truck here, and so he's going to have to pay us some additional fees and things like that. So he really wishes you hadn't actually bought that truck, bull. So I tried to kind of add some lightness to this conversation, but there is some seriousness to it as well. So it's very interesting that this week, Wes, in Columbus, Montana, is the Midland Bull Test, where they sell annually 2,500 bulls to 20 western states. Now, for the last couple of years, with everything that's been going on with Trich, they have not tested any of those bulls prior to sell. So the guy that wheels in with his gooseneck trailer and is hoping to take them home with him might have an interesting awakening when that happens. The seed stock, the seller, on the other end, his number one goal is getting these guys off feed. He's been paying high dollar feed for quite a while here, and once that sale happens, he's hoping those bulls are getting on a truck and going somewhere. And the answer to that is wrong. That's not going to happen. Okay? Because we have surrounding states that don't accept pooling of samples. Now, not to be corrective, Dr. Smith, but there are 26, I believe, now with Iowa coming out with some new regs. So there's 26 total states with regs. Of those states, 11 of them accept pooled samples. Now, my point for bringing this up is that those 11 states don't have dummies running their labs. They validate those tests. We have 11 states that have validated pooling of samples. Now, somebody'd say, well, as a seller of a diagnostic kit, are you not going to make less money because people are pulling samples? And the answer to that is, yes, we will. Because, when we take that down from a single sample to a pooled sample, we're going to make less money, okay? Why are we promoting this? Because much like not giving an injection in a top butt from a BQA perspective is the right thing to do, pooling of samples is the right thing to do as it relates to this particular disease. So I think we need a wake-up call as it relates to the laboratory testing that's going on. One of my concerns is that when you get in one of these academic, research-based conversations, we start chasing lots of rabbits. What about this study or what about that study? Let's look at what are the things we can agree upon, okay? That's the premise of what we're trying to present today. And just to lead into that a little bit, here's some of the objectives that we'd like to accomplish with Dr. Leyva's presentation. We really have a need to build confidence in Trich testing. This is very much a shit rolls downhill kind of thing when it comes to regulatory, state regulatory. We're going to tell you what you need to do, okay? Cattle producers don't like regulations one damn bit. So consequently, when it comes to trying to create palatability for that, we've got to find the ability to communicate that to where we get some consistency and it builds confidence with producers and veterinarians. We've got to increase the consistency in the test results. Linda Hickman and I were visiting earlier about, reclassification of bulls and these false positives, and what are we going to do about it, okay? At the end of the day, we've got to come up with some consistency, and then we got to hold to that consistency. We've got to try to minimize the sample quality influence variables, and we really need to minimize the laboratory testing variables that are taking place. We've got some best management practices or best lab practices, I guess I should say, and we need to just take that step forward in implementing those across states. And the last one is we need to try to figure out how we reduce burden and cost of man and beast. So, I mentioned this Trich. I reached out to one of my friends in the business, Dr. Randall Spare from Ashland Vet Clinic in southwest Kansas. And, this Trich costs a lot more money than a regular pipette. But for him, he looks at it as an animal welfare opportunity. He utilizes it because he thinks it's, number one, gets us a very consistent sample, but number two is better on the animal. And so that's something we need to put in our head and be thinking about. I want to touch upon what Dr. Van Boning mentioned earlier. We did a seminar in San Diego with USHA and invited the state vets. We wish we would have gotten some of the lab personnel to that meeting, but it was just the timing of it didn't make it work for the AAVLD folks that were in attendance. But I think at that particular event we talked about the need, and that's frankly why we're here today. We have identified there is a need for standardization of testing and regulations. There is that need, okay? Now we're at the point of trying to say, how can we find some common ground? What is it we can agree to? And I talked with Dr. Brown from Kansas about this, and, it's very evident that we're not going to get the people who are at 12, months of age on their bulls to 24 months of age, and we're probably not going to get the guys who are at 24 to 12, all right? So where is the in-between? And let's find that. It's one of the simplest things I would hope we could accomplish. And I know your comrade in Montana, Marty, has been working on this, and I hope he hasn't abandoned his efforts because, he's been that spark of flame that's helping move this thing along. So I leave that with, as you start listening to Yvonne's presentation, to focus on what we know we can do. Stop chasing rabbits and let's try to find some common ground that we can build upon. Thank you.
So we are really grateful that we have been allowed to present some of the results that are pretty much in the paper that you're having in your tables. This is a big study that was proposed back in the day in 2010, and it was finally published in the JBDI publication of January of 2014, at the beginning of this year. And so I'm going to jump in right away to the background of the study, not to the disease, because that's been pretty well described during this meeting. So the need to perform this study, born in 2010 in the ABLD Parasitology Committee, where they were asking the question about the pooling capabilities of the smegma sample. And at that time, we didn't know the sensitivity of the test after pooling samples, and we didn't know the sample size that you have to determine to combine samples. And that was one of the questions. The second question was consistency between labs to call a positive and negative. We knew that there were multiple workflows for calling positives and negatives, and that involves like sample preparation and also real-time PCR. So that was the second question. And at that time, Dr. Lee Effinger from Oregon Department of Ag was the person who was designing the project. And in conjunction with Dr. Marilyn Simunik, they did a great job putting together some efforts to collect samples through different labs. And so they were the ones who designed the project, and also they were keeping the data blinded for a central lab who was conducting the big study. And Life Technologies at that time agreed on sponsoring the study, somehow providing reagents. So that's a little bit of the background of the study. And the objectives were pretty much to investigate whether or not we were able to pool samples and to investigate the level of sensitivity. The second objective was to gather information of the different sample preparation systems and real-time PCR assays that were conducted in different states, and then compare results using the same set of samples with those different workflows versus what Life Technologies had to offer at the time, and see if there was consistency or discrepancy between calls and with that set of samples. Also, in that year, there was a big question about the specificity of the assay. There was a group who was claiming that the primers and probes utilized for the diagnosis of tritrichoma fetus was not entirely specific, and they have observed some sort of cross-reactivity with low amplified samples, and we took that claim pretty seriously, so we decided to investigate that once we learned about the number of positives that we were going to be observing in the study. So we decided to sequence each of the samples and just make sure that we have a good clue about the specificity level of the primers and probes. So for the materials and methods, pretty much we were able to work with 5 different labs. We wanted to include more, but usually workloads in labs during hybriding seasons is complicated, so some of them didn't have enough time to participate in the study, gather samples, and send them to a central facility. So we ended up with 5 different labs, and all the labs are blinded. That's an agreement that we are respecting. And but the location is that one lab was on the West Coast, another one in the Southwest, one in the Central States, and 2 labs on the South. So each feeder lab was running their own protocol, including the sample preparation system and the real-time PCR. And that information was sent to Dr. Marilyn Simunic, who was the data keeper. And all the samples from these 5 different labs were sent to a central lab that we call study lab, which is Kansas State Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, KSVDL, who ran the diagnostic test on the same set of samples from those 5 different labs with a commercial sample preparation system, MacMax, and also with commercial reagents for Trichomonas foetus. So this table will tell you pretty much the number of samples that the labs were providing to the study. Overall, we got 161 positives and 640 negatives and 2 suspect samples for a total of 803 samples. And those calls, positives, negatives, and suspects that are being represented in this table are the samples that the labs were reporting with their own workflows. So we got all those samples, well, not us, but the central lab. And the central lab ran the same samples on a different sample preparation and real-time PCR to compare the calls. So this is a table that looks a little bit messy, but it's a pretty interesting table, and you can find it in page 64, I believe. And it has a whole bunch of good information that describes the input volume for sample preparation, the input volume for real-time PCR, the different PCR conditions that each of the lab is utilizing, and so on. So it has a lot of information that is telling us that there's a lot of variability between labs for performing their own testing. And highlighted in red, I have key points. It's too small to observe there, but there's a lot of variability, for example, between lab A, B, and lab F, for example, or lab C, that the input volume for the real-time PCR varies like from 4 microliters to up to 8 microliters. And the primary and probe design, for example, there's one lab that uses a modified version of the famous Macmillan's primers and probe assay. And this is something to keep in mind because this is pretty interesting for the study. This is an improved version of that assay. And the threshold to count positives and negatives, it's also, the way to set up threshold is different. Some of them use control-based thresholds, some others use a fixed threshold. The cutoff value for calling positive and negative is all over the place. Some of the samples have to be lower than 35 CTs to be positive. Some other labs are up to 38, 37. So there's no consistency between labs. And that's information that is being kindly provided by each of the labs, and it's now publicly available. And this is something to keep in mind, that it will be nice to have like an harmonization effort on these techniques. And the reason for that is because the results on this slide is pretty much telling us that there are labs who were having a close agreement between what they were reporting and what the central lab, testing lab, KSVDL, was reporting. For example, Lab F, who used a different sample preparation system, which is a commercial preparation system, they got like 99.5% agreement, almost 100% agreement. In Lab A and B, for example, they drop the agreement as low as 83%. And in Lab A, they got 97%. It's a good agreement. And then Lab C, for example, using the same sample preparation system, they didn't get 100%. They got a 96% agreement because they have a modified version of the protocol that Life Technologies was recommending at the time. So that's one of the reasons why they didn't reach agreement in a higher level. However, for such a big study, we really recognize and we are really happy to see that overall an agreement of 96% roughly was observed. So the study was like a big success because lower on that would be like a little bit more dramatic. But it was a pretty nice result. So the conclusions on the study is that we were able to assess 803 smegma samples by real-time PCR, and those samples were pretty much tested with MAC-MAX sample preparation and MAC-MAX T-FIRS reagents. The agreement was like around 96%, and interestingly, the Lab F reached almost 100% agreement. However, some of the remarks of the study is that the study lab was able to identify 20 more positives than what the labs were reporting. So I think that's a lot of animals. And some of the explanation is that for some of the labs, the sample preparations that they were using boiling, which is pretty much heating the sample, and there's no a good cleanup of the inhibitors of the sample, and there's always a risk of that low positives, samples having low copy number of the DNA, they are not going to come up in the real-time PCR. And one of the labs was having 9 samples that were reported as positives at the beginning, and we got them negatives. And the central lab was pretty much offering the opportunity to retest the samples. So we offered that benefit, and we sent back samples to the testing labs, and they couldn't repeat those 9 positives. We have a lot of speculation for what's happening there. One of the explanations is sample degradation after multiple freeze-thaw cycles. Chances are that you will be missing the low positives. And the second one is something that came to discussion also is sample mislabeling. So for the pooling section, this is roughly the methodology. We were proposing to pretty much pool 5 samples. And since we had like 176 positives, we decided to pool all of them. And that means that for some of the sample labs, we didn't have enough negative samples to pool, to create the pools. So we kept reusing the negative samples to accomplish all of the positive pools. And so the samples were pretty much reused, the negative samples. And that means that 1 positive pool went along with 4 negatives. This table represents results before and after pooling, and these are CT values. From the 176 samples, pretty much every sample that initially got a CT of lower than 35 was positive after pooling. So we focused on samples that were greater than 35, and the third column will tell you the original CT from top to bottom, the lower CT to the highest CT, and then the fourth column will tell you the result after pooling. And some of the samples that were, for example, a fairly good CT, having a 35 CT value, which is good on individual samples. After pooling, it was undetected. And the reason is because when you're pooling, sometimes you are bringing inhibition to the pool, meaning that one or multiple of the 4 samples that are composing that pool are having inhibitors. So you bring inhibitors, and then that original CT of 35 is being displaced, so it's no longer there. So there's obviously some loss on sensitivity, and those are the questions that we wanted to answer with this big pooling study. Some of the samples in the other side, they improved the CT, because if the original sample was having a CT of, let's say, 36, and then you pool it with 4 negative samples, you might be diluting inhibitors by chance. So the CT jumped from 36 to 33. So you will have both cases every time that you pull. And also, there was a question about what if you pull less number of samples, the sensitivity will be improved. So that was the second question on pooling. And so we did perform pooling in 1, 2, or 3. One positive sample with 2 negative samples. And so the results is that pretty much, again, samples lower than 30, having CTs of lower than 35, they will be all positives, at least in the data that we're showing. And samples that are pretty much greater than 35, there's a risk that you will miss them. So the sensitivity that has been calculated for this study is 96%. So you will be missing 4% of the samples if you pull 1 to a 5. If you pull 1 to a 3, you will be improving a little bit, just 0.5%. So it's not a dramatic change. I think you can still get along with 1 to a 5, just considering that the sensitivity will be 96%. So there's no test out there that is 100% sensitivity and specific. And this is something to keep in mind. Those are the results for pooling. So the third objective was the specificity of the assay. As I said before, there was a concern that the primers and probes utilized for this assay were cross-reacting with another organism. There was a group who reported that, and the organism is Simplicimonus moscowitzi, which is a non-pathogenic, close-related parasite of Trichomonas fetus. At the genomic level, we couldn't find too much information. There's only one sequence on GenBank as today. And however, we utilize that information to develop a nested PCR. So we pretty much amplified every positive sample and every low positive sample, which lazy-Ts. We try to do that with nested PCR and then sequence each of the samples. So this is some of the results for sequencing. So on the top of the sequence data, there's a red bar. The second sample has like a 4/8 that are pretty much representing a different sequence, which is specific for Simplicimonus moscowitzi. That's our control. And then none of the samples that were pretty much included in this study were having that signature there. So we assume that they were all Trichomonas fetus. However, one of the samples, which was not a lazy-T, it was actually a sample having a CT of 33, was called positive in feeder lab hands and also in the central lab hands. And when we tried to sequence that sample, we tried multiple times. We were not able to get any sequence at all. So this is another example of that we learned that there's no 100% specific assay out there. And we don't exactly know why the sample was not able to be sequenced. And the thing is that maybe there are some variants at the genomic level, a point mutation, that was not allowing us to capture that amplicon because of the lack of specificity of that genomic region with one of the primers. We don't know, but that's one of the hypotheses. The most important thing is that the rest of the samples, none of them show any other sequence on Trichomonas fetus. So we didn't observe any Simplicimonus moscowitzi sample in the study, which is quite good to know. As a conclusion, the overall results, we are really happy again to see a great level of agreement between testing labs and the central lab, which is roughly 96% agreement, using life technology reagents, which is pretty much an automated sample preparation system, and the BedMax reagents as well. And the takeout for the pooling is that 1 to a 5 pooling will give you 96% sensitivity. 1 to 3 will give you a little bit better, but it's not a huge change. And for the sequencing, we were able to sequence 176 out of the 175 samples that were having amplification.
What you've heard is a study that has been published, has been peer-reviewed, and evaluates some different things as it relates to the pooling of samples, and that there's some ability to build some confidence around pooling as a opportunity within the workflow of these different laboratories. You've heard from multiple people so far what the veterinarian can do from a sample collection, handling, and shipping perspective, but you did see some variance as we looked through this particular study on the sample preparation methods and how that can influence the quality of the sample. The extraction volumes, the enzyme type used, the analysis thresholds, whether they're using internal positive controls or not, and ultimately, do they use a USDA licensed kit, that has additional quality control measures in place. So these are just a few things that actually, if you dig into this study and you evaluate the backbone of it, you can pull out some things that can be some of those key points, Dr. Anderson, that we can look at to find some standardization. So I want to reiterate that we'd like to build confidence in Trich testing, that I think that should be a goal, and we should be striving towards minimizing some of the variables and creating more consistency so it does place less burden on man and beast. Thank you.